My name is Alana, and I use they, them pronouns.
And my name is Jessie. I use she, her pronouns.
And we're
we're
making
making
menches.
menches.
Making Menches is your home for queer, anti-Zionist Jewish ritual, radical education, and community.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first episode in our mini series where we're talking to different Jewish communities and organizations that are existing outside of major cities across the US. Today, we are talking to Stephanie from Taste of Olam Haba. Hi, Stephanie. It is so great to meet you. We're so happy to have you here.
Yeah, thank you.
If you could just let us know your name, pronouns, and then your role within your community, and then tell us a little bit about the community that you're a part of, that would be great.
Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie. I use they, them pronouns. So I am a activist, an organizer, and professor here in Arkansas. And so I founded Taste of Olam Haba in the middle of the early parts of the pandemic. And it actually really started as I just started baking challah, babkas, and rugula during the pandemic and started just feeding my neighbors and putting Jewish baked goods in our little free pantries across town. And then that sort of molded into, oh, we could have like virtual Shabbats where people are able to join in. And it really molded over the next 5 years into a community with over 30 members within it, where we are regularly hosting in-person and virtual Shabbats, holiday services, as well as a lot of political action, spiritual education as well.
That is so beautiful. You gave me an incredible spiel about Taste of Olam Haba right before we started recording, and I'm wondering if you could just restate that for the people listening, because I think it was such a great explanation of what your community is.
So we seek to be a cross-pluralistic as well as multi-generational collective of Jews coming together within a spiritual community. So we see ourselves sort of as an independent minion, also as an organizing collective for non-anti-Zionist Jews, as well as a place where we're raising our kids and being able to also educate where we are in Little Rock, Arkansas, also the general public of Jewish culture and ritual and tradition as well.
What's the Jewish community like in Little Rock? And what's the radical community like there?
As somebody that has grown up and been raised in Arkansas, I work in Jewish community all the time, both with my professional work, my academic work. And anytime I ever say, "Oh, I'm from Little Rock, Arkansas," people's response is always, "There are Jews in Little Rock, Arkansas." And so I will say Arkansas does have a pretty small Jewish community, probably around 2,000 Jews in the whole state. Where I'm in Little Rock, we have one Reform synagogue and one Conservadox synagogue that used to be an Orthodox synagogue of some families that just came over from Eastern Europe. And then we're like, we need to keep the synagogue alive. Let's move to the conservative movement to be able to bring more people in. That's really what our establishment Jewish community looks like here. And we have, our federation, things like that, but relatively pretty insular Jewish community. Many of us either grew up here in Arkansas, many of us have traveled in, moved here with family, friends, found jobs here. And so really one of the things that kind of unites all of us as we've come to Taste of Olam Haba is we aren't finding the community that we need in the very, very small spaces that we already have here. And so it was really born out of a necessity of we need people to really connect with where we're at. I think one of the most interesting pieces about Taste of Olam Haba is we have people of so many different kinds of relationships to Judaism and like observance levels. So as somebody, I consider myself pretty halakhically left. So I'm by far the most observant person in our community. And we have people that grew up all the way secular and only understand themselves as a Seinfeld Jew. That is not my expression, that is theirs. And so I think everything in between of really being able to mold the space also in a really, as you said, radical way. And so for us, many of the people are already or have been involved in political organizing and activism and all of the different avenues of social justice, queer and trans liberation here, reproductive justice on the front lines of abortion access here. So many different pieces. And so for us coming together, part of it was we need to connect our Jewishness with the radicality that we're experiencing in other parts of our lives. So really what grew within the last year and a half, obviously, was the war and genocide in Gaza. And so really seeing we have a moral, ethical responsibility to be in these movements and really being visible for our community. So I think for us, really as we built out our membership model in the last year and a half, guided by these principles that we are doing all of the work, whether it's praying in a minyan, whether it is marching in the streets, whether it is having a challah baking class, all of these are coming from a deep radical tradition, not just of a radical tradition within Judaism, but also from all of our identities. All of the leadership within our organization are all queer. Many of us are trans. Most of us are disabled. I'm Sephardi, so we have also other Sephardi Mizrahi Jews as well, folks that are in interfaith relationships. So, like, all of these different positionalities lead toward and help us support kind of the radical underbelly of what we're looking to do as a spiritual community, first and foremost.
Thank you so much for that answer. I think the insular nature of Judaism, especially like in the United States, is a failure and a tool to sort of like silo us and be like,
Mhm.
well, all Jews live on the East Coast and mostly in New York. And that's the only place that Jews live in the United States, which is just, obviously not true. And there's been so many communities that I feel like, Jesse and myself have connected with over our time doing this work. And there's so many more that I think are out there existing, like Taste of Olam Haba, and it's so important that we connect and collectivize more just to
Yeah.
present, like, a more united front, especially now. And
Yeah.
so, it's really exciting to hear that you have been able to, like, create and build and maintain this community in Little Rock. You touched on, like, how the need for this space and also, like, the space in general has shifted since October 7th and the escalation of the genocide. Could you talk a little bit more to, like, what is organizing anti-Zionist spaces like in Little Rock, both generally, and what is it like to identify as an anti-Zionist Jewish community space, if that's how you identify in Little Rock?
So I've been working in Israel Palestine work since about 2013, but many of the folks that are within our network really after October 7th, we've all, as Jews, somehow been implicated in what is Israel and how this is navigated and works in our own communities. But like actual tangible organizing against the occupation really was catalyzed for most of our group after October 7th. And so it was really in the moment, how are we organizing and doing some of the work of like, how do we do the work while also doing the work, which is very difficult to do. Like we are, putting together the plane as we're flying it in some ways, where we really had good infrastructure to be able to serve spiritual needs of being able to do different pieces in terms of holiday services and be able to be in community spiritually for us then of what is our role within the infrastructure of our city, how we've been organizing, and in many ways, for us, building relationships that many of us have already been building with our Muslim community here. Like, how do we actually tangibly plan that out and have goals and strategies of what we want to do? So I will also say there's an organization called Little Rock Peace for Palestine, where I was a co-founder along with two Palestinians here in Little Rock that really was the idea was blossomed in about 2021, and then we really, after the genocide started, formed an organization, and now as we launched our membership model in October, now is up to 79 members. And so really being able to work in collaboration and coalition with other organizations, so we're also doing the work but I think there are unique particularities about being Jewish in the South, about being visibly Jewish in the South, and being visibly anti-Zionist and Jewish in the South. And so I can speak from personal examples that even before October 7th, I have been doxxed by neo-Nazis. I've had neo-Nazis show up at my home, to face my home, and that has only increased after October 7th. I regularly will have police follow me after protest, as well as with my Palestinian comrades as well. And so that is a reality of like state suppression and the role that fascism has already been having in our communities. I think people are keep saying fascism is coming, and I think for us, like fascism has already been here. We have been dealing with these struggles, and as I always say, the South are the front lines for every struggle, and the rest of the country needs to actually pay attention to the people that have been doing this work for generations, and now people that are now facing the brunt of it really are not learning lessons from people that have already been doing the work. I say that for Jewish communities, I say that for any organizing community. That's the reality. I think one of the real difficulties of anti-Zionist organizing here has been the complete and utter erasure by establishment Jewish community. We have been called out by all of our local rabbis as not Jews. We have been shamed publicly. We have been shamed in rooms that we are not a part of and rooms that we are a part of. One of the things that we did with Little Right Peace for Palestine was work towards passing a ceasefire resolution. We had the president of the Federation send open letters to several cities where this was trying to happen, vocalizing their opposition, but didn't even have the courage to actually attend the meeting to voice their opposition, which is what we're seeing everywhere, right? Many of us have been told explicitly by rabbis, you are not welcome in the synagogue. Like the spiritual crisis of what does it mean to be in Jewish community when Jewish community is doing everything possible to make sure that I am not a part of it. There's always questions of how do we do activism work if we are not fed? And I think for me as a spiritual leader, I think about that often of I think for us to make this work sustainable, we have to care for the spiritual health of the people a part of it. And that includes their children, that includes their family, that includes the networks that we have of care. And so I think the grave like disappointment and just the inability to even hear is really what we've experienced from our local Jewish community. When many of our members had conversations with our local reform rabbi, oh, is there any chance that the Israeli flag could be taken off of the bima for just one Shabbat service? Absolutely not, never. And like that approach, there's just no level of conversation. It is only entrenchment, is really what we've seen. And when you have such a small Jewish community, that then becomes representative of, well, everybody is in agreement with this. And one of the things we've really been trying to do is do outreach with people that may be in the synagogues and may be having questions and maybe, wanting to challenge and wanting to be able to find an alternative. Many of us identify as anti-Zionist. Some of us would identify as non-Zionist. Like, how do we provide space for people to even ask questions? And so one of the things we are really hoping to do if this genocide ever ends is to really be able to like kickstart more of those conversations and get into like those that ability to be able to bring new people in and say it's never too late to kind of be able to say that this is wrong. And I think that's really where we're hoping our work can continue.
Thank you for that, because I think so many of us forget what it's like to organize in such a hostile environment. I mean, New York is hostile for some reasons, absolutely. But to be persecuted by your Jewish community and neo-Nazis at the same time is just a struggle we don't face. So and I think what you're sharing about like the rest of the country being shocked that this is what's going on, and you're like, hello, we've been here dealing with this forever, I think is exactly the lesson that has been so frustrating about a lot of liberal spaces right now,
Yeah.
or leftists. So and what you're sharing is making me really think about safety and safety concerns. And obviously, minyanim have different struggles than synagogues when it comes to safety. We have different politics when it comes to safety. And I'm just curious about building like membership and a membership model in a community in which your members might be identified and doxxed and harassed by neo-Nazis or the local rabbi. And that's really scary. So what is it like to build membership in your community?
One of the most interesting things when I tell folks about our like services, half of the people that attend are not Jewish. And for us, we get a lot of questions of like, when does something become not Jewish? And we've gotten a lot of criticism, I think, about that, about having and being so open to non-Jews in our space. Now, do we have very clear guidance for people that are not Jewish coming into our space and like how people show up with cultural humility, especially Christians? That is like part of our safety protocols. What does it mean to really radically welcome the stranger into our home? And like, I think most of all of our services are held in members' homes. We use a public library, we'll use outdoor spaces and parks. But for the most part, we are being really brave, I would say. And we do have protocols. You have to RSVP for things, and we will do some basic, like, let's check this person out. So, like, to make sure they're not a neo Nazi. Like, we have those internal pieces, but fundamentally, we will always sacrifice some level of personal safety to open our doors to the community. And we have been burned by that. We have had people that have attended some of our online services and then sort of like spammed our Zoom. But yeah, I think that one of the things we talk about, right? We have very explicit values that we don't work with the police as a organization, as individuals. Now, living in a place like Arkansas where you have 14 police at every synagogue, which I don't think that's an Arkansas issue. That's everywhere. But I think that the ways in which our local synagogues work with the FBI and with so many different ways of like instilling this idea that in order to be safe, we have to be separate. One of my favorite stories to tell for people is the role that our local synagogue played in the civil rights movement in terms of one of our local rabbis, Central High. Many people know here in Little Rock the story of Central High and desegregation. And it was one of our local rabbis that was in a room of 150, 200 Christians, like loudly proclaiming and fighting for desegregation. And there was a beautiful synagogue right in our downtown. It was a beautiful Byzantine-like synagogue, and that was actually torn down. And then that same synagogue was put out in West Little Rock in the white flight neighborhoods and is totally enclosed by trees. You can't even see the synagogue from the road. Um, and I think that's symbolic of so many Southern Jewish organizations and synagogues and even federations. And like, I think that we, in many ways, have become so isolated. I think we were talking about that earlier. In order to protect ourselves, we're going to shield ourselves from the community. And that also shields us from the ability to be in community, right? Like, if we see our struggle as this one particular piece, and somehow this is inherently unique and inherently anti Semitism is the one thing that is unlike any other form of hatred, like, of course, we now have lost our roots to solidarity with the local Black community here. Of course, we have lost solidarity with working class and poor people. And so I think one of the things really seeing is how we want to navigate questions of safety. And I'm thinking back of Ben Lober's book and Shane Burley's book, right? Safety through solidarity. Like, how do we lean into that so much more than we're leaning into, even when there are legitimate threats of safety, I think that more than many people in other places may be experiencing. So I think these are real live questions for us. Like the value of how do we lead, which is openness instead of insularity, I think is something we're really struggling with, but I think working really hard to achieve. Our Passover Seder last year was held in a mosque. We want to claim that it's the only Passover Seder in the South that's ever been held in a mosque. We can't actually verify that by any sort of measure. I think for us to be able to reimagine and reconnect with our traditions in new and innovative ways. And I think for some of us who grew up, like for me, a bit more traditional, more observant, like I'm getting out of my comfort zone of what those things can mean. And for some folks that are on a ritual team, they're like, let's just do anything. And I love that energy because it again comes from that position of we just have to be in community with each other. We show up to our spaces because we're so small, relatively speaking. Little Rock has 500,000 people. Like, how are we just going into people's homes and eating together and having food? I like go to the grocery store with some of my Palestinian neighbors just for fun. I'm like, let's go to the grocery store. Like things like that, where it's where you're in community with people that are both so different, but also so similar to you. I think that that's where we've really been able to experience a new kind of Judaism and like showing us that that really is for us what the core of Judaism is.
I think what you're saying about creating this new form of Judaism is real because it is like so outside of the Judaism that so many of us grew up with, were taught was the case. And so all of us in all of these different ways, like really inventing the wheel. Like there is no foundational institutional support for the work that's being done. And I just think it's so hard, but incredible that we are like co-creating it in these ways that are making it so much more like expansive. And so I think it's really beautiful how involved it seems like your community is with both the local Palestinian and Muslim community, but just in general with like building a new type of Jewish community in Little Rock. I have to imagine the challenges are numerous and abundant. Could you speak to some of the biggest challenges you found in this work? And then what parts actually are easier than people might expect they could be?
I think people genuinely do want to learn. And I think for us, one of the things, and this goes into a challenge, I think, was when we open ourselves up to some scary things and different things, we don't know what's going to happen. But I think one of the things that we have learned is people genuinely want to know about Jewish tradition and Jewish ritual, and especially what anti Zionist or non Zionist tradition looks like. And I think so many of the best and most meaningful experiences have been someone that is not Jewish, like, having this, like, moment of, like, "Oh, I understand, like, I get it." And I think what's even more beautiful is when we have somebody that is Jewish, and this is their first time coming to a Shabbat table in 20 years, and they say, "If I had a Judaism like this when I was growing up, I would have never left." And I think for us, really trusting that people want spiritual community. I know many rabbis who maybe have deep disagreements about this. One of the things that we are seeing is people are busy and people are so overwhelmed with the world. They're like, I really want this to happen. I need this community to be able to fulfill me. So I'm going to do what I can. And so that leads into the challenge, right? We can't do all the things that we want to do. We don't have enough time, we don't have enough people, and we don't have enough money, which we always like, that's the ugh answer, right? We don't have a permanent space, and so it's something beautiful to do things out of members' homes, but that's limited of how many people we would be able to actually have at a service. As we hope to grow and as we hope to be able to serve a lot more people, I think we are looking to how can we lead with our values and be able to either co-host a space with somebody else? Right now, we're close to kickstarting our Passover kind of fundraising campaign to raise $6,000, which seems like a very small amount of money. But for us, that could pay for basically all of the services that we do up until probably the high holidays. And so, because that includes not just meals and Shabbat services, but it pays for us to be able to do protest. It pays for us to be able to cover books for everybody who joins our book club. It pays for the ability for folks to be able to provide mutual aid to our comrades. All of the different ways in which we're able to show up for community. I think we're all just experiencing, especially here in the South, a lack of resources. So many of the organizations that have been doing such good work here in trans and queer liberation, now basically half of their funders have left because people are abandoning the South. We're a lost cause here. So I think Jewish communities are facing that, organizing communities are facing that. We really want to be able to build a sustained network to provide for ourselves and also we know that people that don't live in Little Rock also wanna support us, so it's like, how are we able to build deeper connections where people also in Philadelphia would be able to, like, still feel connected to the work that we're doing here, and it feels reciprocal?
Wow, yeah, I'm just, like, reflecting on that line that you're like, "We're a lost cause here," it's just so heartbreaking, and also, I don't think true at all, but I think in the North, which is the weirdest way I've started a sentence before, the way that, like, the public derision of what's happening in the South is just so common, I think really erases the work that you and your comrades and people like you in other states are doing, which is like holding the line, like fighting for the right to gather as Jews in parts of America. So it's just it's rough to hear and also like a good reminder that like we can absolutely connect with each other and support one another and make sure that everybody knows who Taste of Olam Haba is and like make sure that that isolation isn't going to destroy your community.
It's been incredible to hear about the volume of work that it sounds like you're able to do as a community. Like you're describing Passovers, you're describing Shabbats, you're describing a book club, high holiday. Like that's so much. Jesse and I certainly understand that that is a massive undertaking. I'm super curious, like who else is involved? Or is it just you? If so, I'm sending you so many prayers. But like in my hope is it's not. And if so, like what is the distribution of labor like? How do your services get co-created? How do community members contribute in those ways to this community?
So, part of our membership model is both a financial contribution as well as a labor contribution. And so all of our membership, all of our programs, everything is always on a sliding scale. So we have various different levels of support based on income. I mean, deeply rooted in Tamura to be able to have a Jewish framing for how we redistribute wealth, but also in terms of labor. So we have folks that are skilled in ritual. So we have ritual cabal, which we find the irony in that title. So we have a ritual cabal. We have a Mishnah cabal that we do study with. We have an outreach cabal. So we have a lot of different internal infrastructure to meet the needs of the different types of work that we do. So we co-facilitate our book clubs every month. So other people will take on facilitating conversations. We will often have folks that will sign up to take a monthly Shabbat or be able to host at their home. I will say it's not perfect. I will say that as a founder, as somebody that's also has the most institutional Jewish knowledge. I'm also a professor of religion. People refer to me. Everyone always thinks I'm a rabbi, and because I'm always, like, visibly very Jewish, people are always like, "It's the rabbi," and I'm like, "I'm not the rabbi. Please don't call me the rabbi." No, no chagrin to any of the very amazing rabbis I know. So, I think that we are really trying more to really reevaluate how we make this work sustainable. Um and so I think as we grow and as we bring on more members, part of what we do is a skills assessment of like, where do you sort of feel folks are able to plug in? And you may hate cooking, so you are definitely not going to be doing Shabbat dinner, but you love to make art. So we could do a poster making session for the upcoming action, right? So really being able to plug in folks where they most need and then also having grace with each other that, like, we are also human beings, and the primary purpose of Taste of Olam Haba is to be a spiritual home for people. Like, sometimes we also just, like, recognize, "Oh, we are sitting with grief today, and these are not things that we're able to do," or, "I am overwhelmed with this." And so I think we are learning slowly but surely just by being in relationship with one another how to sort of navigate some of these pieces. But I think that these are all the things just by being not just a Jewish community, any community that you sort of just like grow and learn with each other. And so that's really what we're really seeking to do and to really create systems outside of also like traditional hierarchy and really leading from what are like deep, deep Torah values of how we are able to think about collaboration instead of relying on these are things given to us by the state to control this is how work should be done. So that's also part of, I think, our how we think about labor is how are we all sharing it in different ways and holding different pieces.
Thank you so much. I think it's so important that these conversations are had in the light, so to speak, just
Yeah.
because these are struggles that all of us are engaging with. So I think it's really wonderful to like get insight and see how your community is functioning because like you stated, frankly, it's incredible that you're functioning as a Jewish spiritual community that is anti-Zionist in Little Rock, which already, as you stated, has like a fairly small population. And on top of that, has a small Jewish population. So the fact that you're sustaining like 30 members, like people who are actively involved in this community, is amazing. Like, that's awesome. And it's really important for folks who might be listening who have big dreams of creating a space like this where they are to hear what goes into actually creating the space and allowing it to exist. So thank you for giving us a peek behind the curtain.
Finances has also been a thing that nobody ever likes to talk about, especially Jews and money. There's so many different pieces there to unpack. People deeply want to be able to give, they just need a reason to. And they want to be able to connect with a vision. And I think that we have had and found individuals within our community that have wealth. Like, I think we can name that people that have wealth, but are also so deeply committed to our vision of building a new Jewish future. And many of these people are not Jewish. And I will also shout out that there is a mosque here in Little Rock that was founded by a woman, which is also revolutionary. And the leadership is half women. And they have openly queer people in their leadership and within the congregation. And to have a radical Jewish community and a radical Muslim community in a place like Little Rock, Arkansas is truly magical. And I think that whenever I share that with people, they are so surprised. And for me, I'm not surprised because I believe radicality has the seed here. Like, we for generations have, out of necessity, had to create something new. And of course, it's built in a place like this. And so for me, connecting with people who created a mosque just 10 years ago. Like, they see, oh, this is all of the work that went into creating our community. We want the same for you to be able to have your own community. Or with our Christian neighbors who recognize, I have a lot of Christian hegemony in this space. Here are real ways in which I can work to undo Christian nationalism and Christian Zionism in my community. And we want to be in relationship with that and conversation and be able to really think about what does redistribution of wealth look like. We also have folks that are Jewish that are, of course, kind of sustaining the majority of our work. But I think it's important to also like talk about money and be honest of how are we raising money to do things, and also not being afraid to ask for money, because I think that there's often a lot of shame around that. I think that there's also a lot of just fear of what if they say no? They will say no. I have asked many people and they have said no, or they have said, I can't right now. But then a year and a half later, they did when they had more access to be able to give. And so I think really having the courage and bravery, and I think that that comes by seeing other people do it. I really will shout out like Zedek Lab, which I'm a part of and have really been and have seen so many people really lead by example and set a clap of like, "Oh, I could do these things and it's not so scary." That's also something to name of like, how do we talk about labor, and because like all of that is really dependent on how are we able to sustain ourselves and how are we able to pay for things, and that will really determine how much labor we need to put in. And so that's just something I think that's really helpful is people want to give, you just have to give them the story. And so I think that that's a talent you also just have to learn, you know?
I think you're so right, is that people don't wanna talk about money, and especially, like, we don't wanna be seen as Jews talking about money and, like, Jewish money and conspiracy and stereotypes and power, and it's just gross. So I appreciate you bringing things out into the light to be like, "Let's just talk about it and name it," and it's hard, and I think a lot of people listening do struggle with that too, who have visions of creating their own thing, which brings us to our next question. In general, I mean, you've given us so much incredible advice already, but what advice would you give to listeners who have dreams of creating a space like this?
It's always about finding your people. And I want that to be as expansive as possible. I think as Jews, sometimes we think of your people as a very specific definition. How could we think of the people like my friend Ali? Like, that is my person, right? And we may not be on the same spiritual path, but like we are there, right? And so I think for me, as I was sort of building out, which it again started in my kitchen and is now like this, relatively speaking, pretty expansive thing, doing multiple activities a month. Like for me, I think the biggest piece was I have to find my people and I have to find people that resonate with the world that I want to create, right? For us, like the cleverness of our name, right? Taste of Olam Haba was it started out we're baking things, right? People are tasting the world to come. One of the first things that I will always ask people when they come to a Shabbat or come to our event is what do you see as the world to come? Like what do you want that world to be? As just sort of like I wanna hear your vision, and I think that people like to share that. I think like people want to be able to have those sort of deep conversations. And so I think that gave me the ability to be able to really make deep connections and really be able to find people that I otherwise probably would never have been in relationship with. And I think obviously being able to be visibly Jewish, I think has really been important for us. Now, that may be a different piece if you're in New York City, but for us, where there are so few Jews, I would say probably half of the people that are now members that are Jewish are now members because they saw that I was in a talit and they saw, oh, I was wearing a kippah at this testimony at the Capitol. I didn't know that there were other Jews here. And so as much sometimes discomfort that that can provide and fear, I think for me, that's also the way that I have found my people is just by being visibly Jewish and also simultaneously being visibly queer and trans and disabled and all of these other pieces that are in many ways sometimes very visible or not. I think that the more that we show who we are and what and how we move through the world, I think people resonate with that. And that's how you're able to connect and find your people. That's probably the best piece of advice that I have. Getting out of our comfort zones a little bit or a lot. I will say I was just in the West Bank for a month. Even there, the ability to find my people and be able to, even if I'm not wearing a Star of David or whatever we want to say, here are the visible identifiers of being a Jew like, to be able to connect with people, you are leading with your Jewish values, and I see your soul is coming from the Torah of liberation and justice, like, I can see that through you and how you move through the world. So, like, whether it's in Arkansas or the West Bank, I think that ability to shine through, "Here's the vision of the world that I want to see, and will you join me in that?" I think is really powerful.
It is really powerful. Thank you. I think that's something that a lot of people need to hear. And speaking of visions for the world to come, what visions do you have for your community in the coming months, years, however long?
One of the things is we have many members who have children, and anytime we ever have a service, we always say, "Won't it be beautiful when these students have their B'nai Mitzvah classes?" And we have a Torah, and we have the ability to hear these kids recite these ancient texts and bring life to it, and I think that's a really far away dream, but something that I think for us, we have to be able to move towards of whether that's in an actual synagogue, whether that's in wherever we're at, to be able to have Torah wherever we are able to have ritual and tradition and be able to bring the next generation in. I think for us, that's where we're moving to go. And so hopefully we will grow and hopefully we will be able to. We always joke one of our members hopefully might be a rabbi. So maybe eventually we will get a rabbi. They'll come all the way home and be our rabbi. But I think wanting to have sort of the vision of this is what we want to see in the sense of this is the culture, this is the heart, this is what we want to see, and having less like fidelity to like these are the milestones we need to hit. Because I think that that's what served us really well over the last 5 years is I don't think I ever really had an idea of like, oh, by 2025, we're going to have these many members by this amount of time really just being able to, like, move with the people that are in the organization and just attend to the needs of, like, as we have more people that join us, those needs will change and being responsive to that. Again, I think for all of us, whether we have children or not, we want the ability to recite yard site together in a community, which we have not been able really to do. We want to be able to have a wedding and we want the ability to have our children have their name mitzvah school, and like we want all of these things. And so how that will look, I think, will really depend on the future. But these are the things that we're really looking towards of how do we create a movement and a community that reflects the full beauty and joy and grief and fear and magic that Jewish life has to offer us. And so I think as we grow, always keeping that vision, as I said earlier, how do we always keep checking in? What does the world to come look like for you? Because at different points in our lives, I think that's going to look different. And as the world changes, I think that's going to adapt. And so, how do we keep asking that question and keep checking in with each other?
Where can people find out more about your organization or follow your organization or donate to your organization?
I like the shameless plug. So you can find us on Facebook, Instagram at Taste of Olam Haba. You can also find us on our website, www.tasteofolamhaba.com. On the website, you can find out how to donate to us. You can also find upcoming events. One of the things that we also say is anybody can become a member. So if you aren't in Arkansas, but you are interested and you resonate with our vision for the new Jewish future, encourage you to become a member. And also one of the things that we're trying to do is also expand for folks that may not live in Little Rock but want to be a part of our services, some virtual options for folks to be more accessible, and even those that may be in different parts of the state that may not be able to travel into Little Rock, because that's one of the things we've really been able to also do is connect with people across the state. And so if you're interested in learning more about us, you can check us out on any of those platforms. And also make sure that you also follow Little Rock Peace for Palestine, which is an organization we work deeply with. And they are also doing some amazing work to divest Israel bonds from the Arkansas State Treasury. So all of these movements are interconnected. And as much as we provide a spiritual home, we also really seek to be able to provide community, whatever that looks like, for both Jews and the larger community.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. It's been such a joy getting to hear more about Taste of Olam Haba and the powerful, mighty community that you're building in Little Rock. If you're listening to this, make sure to go follow, support however you're able to. If you're in Arkansas looking for anti-Zionist Jewish community, maybe you just found it. So check them out and support by going to their events and supporting financially. As you've heard, it helps. Thanks for being down to talk to us. And thank you for all the work that you're doing, building and maintaining this community.
Thank you so much. I'm glad for the people that are the connectors of our world, the ones that are being able to facilitate these conversations. I think there's a special place in the world for folks like y'all that are able to do this work.
Thanks for listening to Making Mentions. As an explicitly anti-Zionist grassroots org, we don't receive any institutional funding or support. Please consider supporting our work by funding us. You can find the donation link on our website, makingmenches.com. You can follow us on Instagram at Making Menches. We host monthly Shabbats both in person and online, so make sure to sign up for our newsletter, which is on our website, to get updates.
Making Menches, the podcast, is produced by Alana Lipkin and Jesse Sander. Intro music is by Nate Sander. Editing by Jesse Sander.